Hi everyone, my name is Yulia Moiseeva. I'm a registered migration agent. I would like to have an overview of the recent announcement from Department of Home Affairs in regards to report and potential and proposed changes in the legislation in a variety of visas. I would like to run you through, guys, on the information we have in hands. It's not yet legislation, and I would like to add my thoughts about the matter. So please be mindful that there is no major changes yet planned, but it's a lot of changes to consider, and the government may or may not consider implementing those changes. So today we will be discussing what may be a direction of migration program in Australia for a variety of visas. The first visa category I would like to talk about will be employer-sponsored visas, all visas where you need compulsory employer sponsorship. At this moment of time, department is talking about a lot of exploitation of overseas workers and their inability or uncertainties to know what's their rights, work rights and options where they can leave an employment or they can progress to permanent residency. The department would like to battle through those issues, and one of the criteria implemented to have some sort of training for newcomers to understand their work rights and obligations, so overseas workers will feel at ease at the workplace in Australia. Another interesting changes the department is proposing is to completely abolish labour market testing. Just to remind you, at this moment of time, if any employer would like to sponsor overseas employee, they will have to place an advertising for at least 28 days in 3 compulsory medias, where obviously it's extra costs for the employer and extra time on waiting for the employee to come and start working. This criteria is proposed to be abolished. However, interesting question arises: if that's going to be abolished, how the local workforce will be aware that the position is in fact available? That will remain as a question when we're going to be waiting for more news from the department. Another big change coming is a proposition to change minimum wage from 53,900 to 70,000 for all overseas employees workers. That's absolutely good change in terms for overseas worker to come and start working in a good salary. However, the department is not distinguishing between big cities and small towns, big businesses and small businesses, where a lot of small businesses would love to invite and keep these workers, because the business will be allowed to grow in this time for the retention of the worker. However, in a remote location, salary of 70,000 a year may be a huge struggle. Also, for some of the occupations, there is a certain award rate where the worker may not reach up to that figure at all. So at this moment of time, the department proposed these changes as to be implemented from the 1st of July. Unfortunately, no more comments were made in regards to any distinguished points between regional or not regional areas, how that's going to be implemented. So we're waiting for more news from the department. Another option department proposed is to extend the amount of time for the worker to find a new job, where, for example, the current sponsorship didn't work out and employee were either fired or ceased to work. In the current legislation, the worker only have 60 days which is a big struggle because 28 days out of the 60, the new employer will have to do the advertising before he will be actually able to lodge the nomination. So the department is proposing to stretch 60 days into 6 months period of time, which is a brilliant solution. At the same time, what's going to happen between the day the employer will cease employment in 6 months mark? Because by law, at this moment of time, within 60 days of changing employers, employee will not be allowed to work for a new employer until the nomination is approved. So 60 days is not the massive amount of time to be off work, but what about 6 months? Again, some questions are still in the air for department to clarify. Another interesting change department is offering is to consolidate the registration of proposed sponsors, which is already in place as a standard business sponsorship, for example, but at the same time, the registration of employees to register somewhere to link your MyGov account with taxation system in order to be efficiently monitoring the amount of salaries going into employees' account. So that will allow the department to have a streamlined solution to monitor the sponsorship and nomination arrangements to potentially avoid exploitation. Another good news is a proposition to change the way the Skilling Australian Fund levy is paid. At this moment of time, again, there is no distinguished point about large businesses and small businesses, and the rules are the same for everyone, where Skilling Australian Fund levy must be paid as a lump sum for amount of years the employer would like to keep this employee. For some businesses, depending on turnover and amount of years, this figure may be up to $8,000 as an upfront payment, which is pretty upsetting and disturbing for small businesses again. So department is proposing the model where Skilling Australian Fund will be charged as a subscription or as an installment-based model monthly during the time the business will retain this employee. Actually, that's a very good model where the business basically enter into subscription and pay this levy monthly. When the employee leaving the business will stop paying, and this basically will work well for the business cash flow. Interestingly, for employer-sponsored visa, department is offering to consider a completely different model, going away from ANZCA codes, even from ANZCA groups, and consider several other options for employment scales and the way the income will be distributed. For example, a light touch cohort with a high salary of 90,000 plus. So for the department, they're proposing this type of people will be invited and sponsored by big corporations to come to Australia for work purpose. And for this cohort, the department is trying to offer some streamlined processing to reach permanent residency. The next one is mid-level cohort with salary level between minimum salary level permitted from the 1st of July, which will be 70,000 until 90,000. So this group of people may not be selected based on ANZCO anymore. So it's still under discussion from the department what sort of ways, how they're going to assess the actual skills and needs. And then third potential group of applicants will be a lower wage cohort in the sectors experiencing persistent shortages. These people may be also at huge risk of exploitation because of the salary, but as we know for now, for example, aged care sector is screaming for new employees, and there is a no matching ANZCA code or no matching occupation in their current lists that will allow employers to employ this type of people. So this may be reconsidered and amended based on the discussion from Skills and Jobs Australia, what sort of skills will be in the high shortages and what sort of wages will be applicable for those cohort to be invited to come and work in Australia. Point-tested skilled visas, subclass 189, 190, 491. As department is considering these visas are not currently working well, as they're not serving the purpose. The true purpose of this visa is to bring highly skilled workers in Australia, where these workers will join the workforce and will be living happily after paying taxes. In the reality, the calibration of the current point test will allow applicants to meet the highest score, come to Australia, and then do whatever they like. In this case, as a study and statistic shows, a lot of skilled migrants, for a variety of reasons, ending up just joining low-skilled force, not the occupation where they nominate for the skilled visa. So in this case, the program is not working. Especially, it's not working in state and territories in regional Australia, where the department is channeling migration. However, yes, some people do not mind to go and live in regional Australia just to get migration visa and serve the term and work in regional Australia to basically achieve permanent residency. At the same time, there is not much or not at all job opportunities in regional Australia, for example, for highly skilled people who would rather go to big cities. So department is proposing to work harder and deeper into these issues with state and territory governments to see how this program can be changed. Maybe the state and territory programs can be consolidated from 2 visas into 1, but then again, how it's going to be monitored for the compliance reasons and how it's going to be implemented, it's still unknown. Department is also looking at reconsidering secondary applicants and their attributes, especially English level. A lot of people obviously coming with families where secondary applicant may not even know English at all or in a very low level. At this moment of time, the applicants are permitted to pay visa application charge in the absence of secondary applicants' English test results. It's good for the government, but it does not work in the long term because these secondary applicants with no English at all coming to Australia and cannot integrate into community, cannot join the workforce properly, the skilled workforce, and department is obviously concerned. In this case, the department may consider implementing potentially compulsory English test for secondary applicant to at least put the higher bar and allow people who would like to genuinely try and reach that level to enter Australia for better settlement. Interestingly enough, department is also trying to put some more subcategories into skilled visa program, where the aim is to attract very top skilled, really young candidates to come to Australia. So the first proposed category can be in-demand skills, where these are applicants with top skills in the high demand globally. So example of this candidate will be the candidate in the mid-30s in the STEM profession who earns 300,000 a year at a large technology company. So these guys are really in demand. Department will try to target them. The question is, if they are so nice and bright and well settled, what will be the pitch why they need to come to Australia? Because it's a bit far and obviously maybe not as technologically advanced. The second potential category is human capital, high human capital, where there is not necessarily these people are aligned with some sort of skill set. However, that can be a young graduates with PhD from top-ranked universities. The department is trying to target young scientists, for example, but at the same time, we already have global talent program, which is not quite working also for the department. So let's see what's going to be a proposition and further explanation in that domain. And the third cohort can be exceptional cases for people who does not fit in none of these categories. However, they still have some exceptional characteristics of an interest in Australia. For example, it's prize-winning academics. Again, the question is, we have global talent program at this moment of time, which potentially is targeting this type of people, but the department is setting this bar for global talent way too high, and the consideration assessment is from time to time very biased. So a lot of good potential academics can miss out because of this selection. Another proposed category of the skilled applicants in which department is very interested is young professionals who completed a certain degree in a certain field from overseas universities. At this moment of time, we already have a visa for overseas graduate, which is working only for engineering degree graduate. This visa gives the opportunity for young graduates to come over for up to 2 years, have a full work rights, and potentially consider any other options. So this visa at this moment of time does not have any clear pathway to permanent residency. Australia is trying to propose the similar, basically, visa category for skilled migrants. This visa will not be state-sponsored or employer-sponsored, but will allow these certain applicants from certain areas, degrees and universities to come over to Australia and settle into Australian workforce. Department is trying to figure out what sort of pathway they can potentially give these bright young candidates. Again, criteria for this new pathway is currently unknown. Student visa. Big changes are expected to be in this domain, but it's only proposed changes that's not yet are seen as implemented, or legislation is not yet drafted for that. So here are the dot points. Genuine temporary entrant criteria to be proposed for change to student temporary criteria. Department is trying to target and invite students with a genuine need and desire to study in Australia and subsequently to build a career in this field in Australia. From my perspective, what does that mean? For all these short courses, the courses are not in high demand, or where your previous background is not aligned with what you're trying to study, or this study will not be of much use for your career, the department will be carefully selective for these students who are progressing into their career. For example, if you get the bachelor degree, have some work experience, spend some years in the field, and then you would like to come for study to Australia, say to do master degree, and then progress into your career. I think based on student temporary entrant, that's going to be the group of people the Australia will be most interested in. So all these short-term, not so much required, necessary or beneficial courses may be gone in terms of student criteria, because they're not going to be enhancing your career perspective as much. At this moment of time, there are a lot of students in Australia without any plan how they will reach permanent residency. That's a lot of students who are jumping from temporary to temporary to temporary visa and just sit in Australia doing low-skilled work with no potential prospects. So department would like to avoid those scenarios. And in this case, the proposition was to consider options for narrow field of study. Narrow in university can be top universities, and some sort of skills and level of degree where those students may be invited to apply for permanent residency pretty much as a direct pathway. This is a good idea. However, in this case, a lot of people will be purely selecting that pathway, and the question is whether they're going to be actually building a career in this field. We don't know. Another scenario, the department is trying to consider implementation of automatic grant for postgraduate, graduate visa after completion of certain studies. And we can see it already in practice where graduate visa may be granted within the same day when the application was made. Also, department would like to consider bright students an invitation for permanent residency earlier than they finish their studies. Again, that's a pretty nice consideration from the department, but the criteria how those students will be selected are currently unknown. Department was also talking about the level of English where the students are coming to Australia without English at all, and obviously studying harder, longer, and again occupying lower skilled jobs. That's not the purpose for student visa program. And the proposition was to consider aligning the level of English from student visa, graduate visa, and skilled visa. Potentially that may mean that the whole level may be up to 6 IELTS or PTE 50, but it's only a suggestion, because currently for some students in certain countries, for certain degrees, the minimum can be 4.5 IELTS with a potential packaging of English test with any sort of program. But universities also do not like students who basically come into Australia with no English. And I believe studying English at home to a certain level will allow you to also be considered as a genuine student, because you dedicated some time for your study of English and passing the English exam to obviously prepare yourself to study in Australia, in an English-speaking country. Also, department will propose to review a working rights cap. So from the 1st of July 2023, the minimum permissible work hours per week will be lifted from 20 to 24 hours per week. Maybe the department will be considering any further implementation of more work rights, but the model they're suggesting is to allow students to practice rather than work. And in this case, we're dealing a lot with enrollments and planning for study and future career in the shape of migration field. And I can tell for students who is aiming for bachelor degree, the majority of universities and programs are offering compulsory practical component for the students to join the workforce, join the practice, with a vision that they may stay there and be offered a job. Unfortunately, for master degree candidates, it's not the case, where the perception may be, okay, you already done one study, you've been into workforce, now it's on you to basically get your own job. Fair enough. At the same time, if the client is coming here to study something absolutely new and they have no connection in the field, of course, then the best point will be to implement this compulsory practice in the master degree component in order to allow these students to progress successfully into the workforce and build a career as they study. So let's see how the department will be implementing these proposed changes. Let's talk about parents' visa now. Department is proposing changes in this cohort of visas as well. So at this moment of time, there is a long consideration of parents' visas due to the huge backlog of the applications, because the demand does not meet the places in the program per year. So due to the huge demand, department is trying to solve the problem how they're going to clear up the backlog. One of the solutions can be a lottery model for parents' visa. I personally think it may be a harsh solution, because every year department will open up the opportunities for applicants to lodge some sort of expression of interest. And then during a certain period of time, the department will be randomly selecting the candidates and inviting them to apply for parents' visa. Obviously, by implementing that model, department will keep the exact places per year, and there will be no backlog whatsoever. However, for those people who already lodged and who are currently in the system waiting for the consideration, what may be the potential options for them? From my perspective, it can be options where the department may leave all these people in the queue, then stop the new applications, and then implement the lottery system in the meantime, but keep processing people in the queue. In this case, you might be lucky to get your visa quicker, as an example. But there is another potential option, and Department of Home Affairs done it for some time ago on a different visa category. The department potentially have a right to just return the applications. And if that's going to happen, especially for people who are onshore on the bridging visas, will be left with nothing, because for the purpose of return and refund, there is no consideration given and there is no decision, meaning You cannot go to tribunal and you cannot reach Minister of Home Affairs. In this case, all these people will have to leave Australia. So that can be pretty upsetting, but it's just only my thoughts about that. So lottery system will potentially give the department the opportunity to fix the queue and clear the backlog. At the same time, department is considering implementing or changing the current temporary visas for parents to come over and still live in Australia, but under sponsorship and under expenses of their own and their children. So at this moment of time, we have several options. Visitor visa, where parents can come to Australia and stay for up to 12 months and basically spend time with children and grandchildren. Another option is 870 visa, where people can stay in Australia for 3 and 5 years. In both of these options, there is no work rights for parents, even if they're active and happy to join the workforce. So all the costs and sponsorship obligations are on the child who is in Australia. Department is considering to implement or change the current programs to allow more time to be spent on temporary visas, and obviously at an expense and obligations from the child who is living in Australia. So in a nutshell, department may be looking at completely removing the direct pathway for parents to apply for permanent residency. But this is only suggestions and part of the report. There is no legislation implemented as yet. And some more minor changes and proposed changes into several programs. Global Talent currently is working with a mixed feeling, because it's hard to find nominator from overseas and it's hard to secure a job from overseas. So at this moment of time, there is a compulsory component to have a nominator, and the majority of applicants just failed on that. So department is trying to offer the abolishment of this criteria, and at the same time, my perception, they may be more favored if the applicant will find a job offer rather than base their reports on the proposed jobs and some sort of statistics. Because at this moment of time, to satisfy one of the criteria for global talent is to show that you either have a job offer for likely and preferably for the higher level of salary, or you would be able to secure that. And this second option, the applicants, especially from overseas, are trying to search for the statistical component and basically give the department all this information that they may or likely will secure this offer. However, the department still preferring to actually have a real job offer as an element of security rather than project prospects, etc., to allow the program to be aligned with the job market and actually serve the purpose. Another good changes in the visitor visa section. The department is finally proposing to consider reusing biometrics. So that's a very good solution, especially if there is a visitor visa and the aged parent would need to travel somewhere far away by plane, by train, just to get the fingerprints each and every time they apply for visitor visa. It's simply not fair, because your fingerprints are unlikely to change. So these are proposed changes for biometric program, where the majority of visas using the biometric program is visitor visa. Department also briefly touched on the business visas with the vision that, in a nutshell, the program is not working correctly and there is a low outcome for taxation and capital in this program. So the program may need some sort of consideration and restructure. At the same time, no further details were provided. What I would like to say at the end is that's a lot of consideration on the directions that Department of Home Affairs may or may not consider. There is no legislation as of yet. So for all of you who are listening to all that changes, it's on you obviously to consider whether you would like to try harder and apply for any visas before the change is happening. But the department reassured that the changes will not be happening all at once from the 1st of July. So it's going to be stagedly implemented, and obviously it's going to be carefully considered. So this report just serves the purpose of any proposed directions where the department may potentially go. And department is trying to implement more automatic systems and improve their IT systems to serve the clients and consider the application to the best possible level and hiring new staff. So we may expect some better and reshaped IT systems for the department to work with us and with you as an applicant to basically bring you to Australia as quickly as possible.